talk about that briefly. So what does it mean to me to remain fluid? Well, we all know water seeps into really low places. And so I think about that when I'm in front of kids and I'm in front of teachers that maybe don't have the background knowledge or experience they need in order to pull off a good, strong teach. And I think about our teaching and our explanations moving into that lowest common denominator to make a connection with the child in order to move the thinking load and the rigor up to the high places. And so that's why I use this description, and that's why I'm using water as my main theme, because water definitely goes into the cracks and crevices. So once you are able to be in those places, you can use visual images that are targeted to telling the story of the science that's happening in front of you, as long as you're making great connections with that concept vocabulary, and you're making connections with the theme of the story, the before, middle, and after, to get the kids to the ending point of that rigor. My challenge to all of you is that if we're not providing something for teachers in a time like this to help with that conceptual lift that's visually supportive, I think we're missing the boat. And that's what EduSmart does phenomenally. And that's what I want to demonstrate for you today. So here is a clip of me working with some kids in a real live classroom last year, late spring. And these kids had heard of this particular topic, but it had not been taught to them in detail. So they had a basic level vocabulary understanding, but this was the first time that they were visually supported in teaching this particular teak. And I believe it's water as erosion. So it'd be a slow change to earth. So I want you to watch through the lens of what am I doing and what are the kids doing and what does it sound like and look like? And think about the lift that EduSmart is providing for me and how I leverage that. Hang on just a second. Okay, here we go. So today we are working on slow. Did it just stall?
It'll come as buffering.
Okay. That would be slow, really slow. That was a good time for it to buffer, right, on that word?
Yeah, that's true.
Well, I'm going to stop and start again. Changes to the earth. Now, what's the opposite? Well, this is a connection error. I'm sorry.
I think it's just buffering.
Okay.
It may help if we turn off our cameras.
Okay.
Sometimes that helps with bandwidth, not always.
Okay.
Positive flow. Well, I'm going to go ahead and move forward. So what you're going to see is the instructional model is running behind me. And I'm demonstrating that there is a waterfall coming down and that water is pounding the rock. And rapid. And there's three rapid. So I'm going to go and escape out of this. So we're going to go ahead and move forward. So what you would notice is that I'm going to go and finish that story. So the background video was telling EduSmart, is telling the kids that the water runs down into the cracks, and there's a great visual of the crack between two rocks and how the water is seeping down below. So I instantly hit the pause button on that video and I said, what does the word seep mean? So the kids struggled with figuring out what that word means, except for some kids, and they figured it out, that it means it goes into small places or low places. That's right. And I said, well, what force drives that? Well, instantly connecting that information to something that was taught prior, which were forces, and a gravitational pull pulls the water down to its lowest point. And the water always runs downhill. So it's easy to use these images and these stories to go back and to connect the dots to prior information as you push forward with new information. So if we have time, I'll try to load that video there at the end again and demonstrate that for you. But as we move forward, I'm thinking about the simple lift of that video playing and me being in control of when I stop it and start it. And even if I want to let it play for these little short 20-second clips, it will stop and ask the kids a question. So it even scaffolds support for teachers that maybe are not master teachers and maybe don't know the concepts that well. It goes ahead and builds in those formative assessment questions in the just right places. So what does it mean to me to tell the story or set up an anchor format that supports questioning and understanding? Here's a good example. So I have picked an example of an experiment and put it on the screen here. And for me, I know that kids struggle interpreting investigations. They just flat out do because they think each one is so unique, when in reality, they're not so unique, as long as you have a system of support in place. So the system of support that I put in place for scholars all across the state of Texas that I've trained their districts on is that what's the one thing I'm changing? What's the one thing I'm measuring? What tool am I using to measure it with? And what increment am I using? So according to this example, step 2, I just subbed in a picture because in step 1, that is our anchor. That is our class-wide anchor that we break down experiments based on. And so I subbed in the picture. And if you read the picture, we would train kids on how to read pictures. And so I would have a student simply talk to me about, what do you see in the image? Well, I see a ramp. I see it's higher on one end. I'm probably going to put cars down that ramp. And then what is highlighted on that screen are 4 different surfaces. And we've trained kids that whatever comes after the word different is the variable. That is the one thing that we're changing. And so I go back to my anchor and I say, okay, what's the one thing we're changing? Surfaces. What am I measuring? Well, I'm obviously measuring speed. Well, what tool am I going to use? Then we go to the things that we know to be true about speed. We're going to use a timing device, and the increment is going to be in seconds. So seconds, timing device, surfaces are all correlated to that particular experiment. And that's how you refine and scaffold the thinking for struggling scholars to be really good at interacting with experiments without having a lot of touch points with it. So I'm going to go ahead and move forward. What could a good anchor look like? This is a personal anchor, not an EduSmart anchor, but this is where I would add some sort of personal voice and choice into my instruction as it comes alongside the support that EduSmart would give me, is that I would use a very general anchor about the water cycle as I introduce the concept. But definitely in 5th grade, by day 2, I would ramp up to this more rigorous example of an anchor, and then I would couple it with these just right questions. So this is how I would write a formative and or some summative questions on my current anchor of support. And you notice that some are scaffolded at a level, maybe a cognitive level 1 or 2, but then some are definitely up at a 3 or 4. For instance, list 3 things that can happen when precipitation falls. That's going to require a little bit of conceptual load on the child's part to interact with these visuals and to be able to decipher the story of the anchor, which tells them basically the story of the water cycle. So keeping on pace here, we can talk about the visual support that EduSmart offers. In every single TEAC band, which is every single TEAC, they have either a lab simulation or an interactivity with lab simulation equipment and or experiments and the modeling of the equipment inside of these instructional modules. So kids not only get the story of how we're going to test out these concepts inside of these stories, they also get things to do that are fail-safe for the kids in order to hit the conceptual load that we need them to. And I love it because this feels game-like to kids, but it's productive gaming because it serves a purpose aligned to the depth and complexity of the standard. For instance, on mixtures, in 5th grade, we have to demonstrate that mixtures maintain their physical properties and that we can separate them out from the concept of solutions, and that we know the difference. And then when it comes to solutions, the cognitive load, according to the TEAC, is that I know how to separate it out using physical properties. So it ties back into prior learning. That's why some districts would consider mixtures and solutions would be a power standard, because you have to use the physical properties inside of this concept to actually hit the cognitive load of separating out a solution. And you can see demonstrated right here in front of you on this particular lab simulation is a great experiment that most of our kids in the state of Texas are probably at best not going to get to do in the classroom, and at worst not going to get to do in the classroom remotely. And so it's just normal business for EduSmart to be this solid. One other caveat about EduSmart is that it doesn't just talk about the nouns. It is aligned deeply to the state standards and to the thinking and the cognitive load. And so that's how EduSmart differentiates itself from other products. It's not just talking about the nouns. So always look carefully at your products and make sure that they are able to be leveraged into multiple spaces with what you need them to be able to do. This is a simple screenshot of an image where I just hit the pause button on an instructional model story that I'm going to call Easy to Scaffold to Rigor. So this question is, which letter represents sunrise? So I want to open up the chat and I want you to tell me what letter you think represents sunrise. So this is where you, when you ask kids to put something in the chat, this is where you really find out who is listening and who's eating lunch, hanging out with friends, watching YouTube. So I completely get it, but I'm going to go and move forward. So in order to answer this question, I go back to what you've trained your kids to do when it comes to interpreting images and being visually literate. Can they tell me the story of sunrise? So in order to attack this problem, you have to know what sunrise looks like. And I've done trainings with the majority of Dallas Independent School District 5th grade teachers, a lot of principals and instructional coaches, almost all of the El Paso area, and a huge chunk of Houston as well. And I will say, teachers struggled with just answering that simple question for me. Tell me what sunrise looks like, and in kid-friendly language. So the answer would be sunrise looks like what it looks like outside for it to go from dark to light. That is how you explain sunrise to a child. And how do you explain sunset would be what happens when it is light and it goes to dark. And that's based on the rotation of the earth. So now that we know what we're looking for, sunrise is dark to light, which letter would you pick on this model to represent that thinking? And so the obvious answer is A would be sunrise, D and B would be sunset, and C would be midday. But you notice how easy it is for Paula No to put a rigorous question up or to pose it to my students to make it a journal write or a chat response, to drive the rigor in questioning, to get more interaction with my kids in real time without Paula No having to scour the internet and resources to find the just right visuals and images. And so at this point, you could easily start questioning students and even go back. If you found that your kids were not successful answering this question, you could go back and play the story of the Earth's rotation on its axis causing day and night. It takes a minute and a half to play that video clip explaining the standard by using EduSmart. So it buys back a lot of teacher anxiety and time. So I'm looking at Tori. I've never seen this question before. I just, that you really like this visualization. Thank you. This is what I've spent my professional life doing the last 3 years, is thriving into this space called visual literacy. I can literally go into failing schools and failing places and help them create strong, visually literate kids that are confident and empowered. And STAR scores go from 20s to 80s. And it's not because our reading levels go up in a year. It's because we can interact with images and interpret images. And we all know that on STAR, we're looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of 72% of the questions have some sort of chart, table, or image graphic in the question and or the answer choices that we have to interpret. Plus, it just makes for a stronger scholar. So I'm glad you're enjoying these images and this story. Let me continue. So here is a screenshot, and this is an actual picture of the end of the video that I was going to show you. And it shows water as an erosion force. And of course, this would be the end of the story. And so I posed this quick write to my kids, describe the process that created this new landform. And so inside of it, I might give my students a word bank. You must tell me the beginning, middle, and end. You must use water. You must use erosion. And then see what kind of results I get if they can truly tell me the story. So this would be more of a summative assessment way that I could use a picture and still leverage and get the outcome that I wanted. So here's one of my most favorite slides, rigorous thinking to fluid transition. So when I think about this, writing the steps out in order to separate the solution and mixture, here's a simple pause on a picture provided by EduSmart in the instructional model. And it says, how do you separate these items? So the kids will actually walk through how to separate them. So my question is, how do I take that meets expectation when it comes to standards and leverage it to masters? So I might take this experience that they had at the beginning of the week, and later in the week, I would ask this question: draw a dot diagram of the particles of the salts, sand and water in these two circles, and demonstrate to me how this is truly a solution and not a mixture. And if kids can't do that, they don't understand this concept to a master's level, then I can step into that space and work with the disruption in their thinking that's not getting them from a meets expectation to a master's. I always throw in random circuit practice questions that I create because kids need practice points with reading circuits and that are complicated, and they see them as a game. And so our kids love, love, love this game challenge on how quick they can give me an answer on where they would place these switches to accomplish the goal of 2 devices on or only 4 devices on. So super fun. You just make this with a simple Google slide, but kids love this. And then here's an example of a formative assessment that I would follow that up with, asking more complicated questions. I used a STAR release image on that particular one. And then as I wrap up, here's an image of definitely living to living and living to non-living relationships, that you leverage this picture in some sort of a graphic organizer where they're identifying inside of the picture that EduSmart provides inside the story, but then they have to write an example of the relationships that they see after they list it. So this would be an example of how Paula took something and made it a simple formative assessment that goes from meets to masters in a cognitive load. And then one of the highlights of the lab simulations and investigations is the soil retention lab, which is done phenomenally. A lot of kids won't be exposed to that. Images here for formative assessment and practicing. And then definitely images using tables and charts are littered throughout their product. And we all know that we don't use this enough, and or our kids are not trained to be confident attackers of tables and charts, which is really just us providing them the tools and the skills to read the story just in a little bit different format. So going back to it, how fluid is your instruction? I just want to hear from you guys right now. Do you have any questions for me or any comments that you would like to make before I close this out? I'll just open it up. All right. Well, guys, thank you so much for being here today. Once again, my name is Paula No. You can find me at paulanoconsulting.com. I love having an opportunity to speak with you and help deepen your conversation or maybe your skill set in making connections with teachers and kids for their success and for their confidence. Please reach out to me if you have any questions or if you're interested in any sort of consulting opportunities. I give webinars, trainings. I work closely with EduSmart because I choose to. They're a fantastic company that really makes a difference for kids. And so I'll end with this. If you could say yes to one decision that would impact every teacher right now, one decision for the price of a cup of coffee per kid, that would impact every kid and give them guaranteed the visual support and the stories behind the science that they would need to be successful, how could you not say yes to that? So I want to leave you with that challenge. So thank you so much for being here. I loved it, and reach out to me if you have any questions. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Paula. Thank you for everyone being on this. When we close, we'll have a very scientific way of selecting the winner of the $50 gift card, and you will each be, well, if you're the winner, you'll be contacted. Okay. So thank you.
Bye, guys.
Thanks everybody for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paula.